Welcome everyone to our second in our Pollinator Symposium series. As Andrew said, my name is Rosemary Burns. I'm a Master Gardener volunteer, a volunteer pollinator specialist, and a beekeeper. I am not an expert, but I'd like to share with you an overview of some of the bees you may see here in Ohio. Identifying a bee on the wing can be very difficult, but they're so interesting to watch and to learn about. I am not advancing, Andrew.
Hit N, Rosemary. N for next.
N for next. There we go. Thank you. It never did it that way before.
Excellent.
Some of the things I'll be talking about are why bees are important, bee anatomy, just a refresher with maybe a few new things. Is it a bee, a wasp, or a fly? It's nice to know what you're looking at. Foraging, nesting, native bees you might see, and how you can help. In the spring, many of us get excited by the sight of the first crocus blooming or pussy willows with their cottony looking buds popping out along the stem. Along with these early signs of spring in the plant world are companion signs from the insect world. It's thought that more than 70% of flowering plants are pollinated by insects. The majority of those insects are bees. Bees are considered our most important pollinators of agricultural crops and native plants because they're adapted to gather and transport pollen. Their branched hairs and fuzzy bodies help females collect pollen. They actively visit flowers to gather pollen for their young. The more flowers they visit, the more young they're able to produce. You may have heard that 1 out of every 3 bites of food is made possible due to pollinators. Fruits and vegetables come to mind. But even our dairy and beef production is benefited by bees. It's the alfalfa bee that pollinates the alfalfa plant, an important food crop for cattle. Plants are the beginning of food webs. Without the pollinators, most of the plants on Earth would be gone, and without them, so would we. Most of us are familiar with the honeybees that live in large colonies of 10,000 to 60,000 bees with a queen, workers, and drones. They're the only bee that produces honey in quantity, hence the name honeybee, 2 words in the science world. You'll see it as 1 word in other places. They're important pollinators, however, they're not native bees. They've been imported and are considered livestock managed by beekeepers. So I may mention honeybees from time to time, but they aren't our native bees. Ohio has about 500 bees that are native. They vary in size from the large carpenter bee to bees that are even tinier than the sweat bees that buzz around you to lick the sweat on your arm or neck on a hot day. This list looks like a lot of bees, but under each family name is a list showing each genus in the family. In each genus, there can be many species. For example, in the genus Lasioglossum, there are expected to be about 93 different species. This summer, an Ohio bee survey is being conducted with volunteers from across the state collecting bees, so we'll have a better idea of just what bees live here. Many times we hear stories about the bees that swarm up out of the ground and sting us while we're working in the garden or mowing or playing outside. Or while we're at a picnic, we see what looks like a bee land on a burger or sip on a drink of pop or soda. Then there are the pictures of a beehive hanging from a tree. All of these are most likely to be wasps. Although wasps and bees are related, wasps are meat eaters. They drag insects to their nests to feed their young. Bees keep their eyes on the pollen for their protein, not on your burger. Both bees and wasps visit flowers for nectar, which provide carbohydrates for them. It can be difficult to tell if a flying insect is a bee, a wasp, or a fly. Some are called bee mimics and look a lot like a bee, but aren't. So how do you know if it's a bee? Bees are insects with the usual insect body parts: a head, thorax, and abdomen. Wasps and bees have the same parts. This slide shows a bumblebee, but the body parts are the same for other bees. You'll notice that there are numbers beside the abdomen part of the diagram. The abdomen on bees has different segments: 7 for males, 6 for females. The T stands for tergal segment. Tergal means we're talking about the top of that segment. In bee identification, the colors and placement of hairs on the segments in the abdomen are an important factor. Some striped bees have hairs of a lighter color at the top of tergal segments, others at the bottom. Knowing where the lighter color is helps in bee ID. The overall shape of the body can help identify bees. Somewhere on their bodies, bees have hairs that are branched like little feathers. They're used for collecting pollen. They're often found on the hind legs or the underside of the abdomen. Their heads have 2 large eyes that are usually toward the side of the head and 3 small eyes toward the top that are called ocelli. The large eyes see color, shapes, and light. The small ones are used for orientation. Bees see green, blue, and ultraviolet best. Flowers often have ultraviolet stripes called nectar guides that direct bees to the pollen and nectar. Their antennae are long and slender, although some bees' antennae are much longer than others. They smell with the antennae. The tongue may be long or short and determines what kind of flower they can reach inside. The 3 pairs of legs and 2 pairs of wings are attached to the thorax, the middle section of the bee. Bees hook the wings together before they fly to help the wings work together and to keep them from getting tangled. There's a fold running along the rear edge of the forewing. The leading edge of the hind wing has a row of hooks that allows the bee to fasten the 2 wings together. The abdomen may be rounded or more oval shaped. It ends in a sting on female bees. There are many variations in color, size, and how the pollen is carried on their bodies. Most bees have pollen collecting hairs somewhere on their bodies. The branched hairs help in collecting the pollen. Some have pollen collecting hairs on their hind legs, others on the underside of their abdomen, and still others in their armpits. The pollen collecting hairs are called scopa and are used to carry dry pollen. Some bees, like bumblebees, have a flattened area on their hind legs called a pollen basket or corbicula. That's used to carry a sticky stash of pollen that's been moistened with nectar. Long hairs cover the corbicula to hold the mass in place. After visiting a flower, a bee may be covered with pollen, especially bees that are really fuzzy. Some bumblebees have been said to resemble flying Cheetos after an especially successful foraging trip. Still other bees have no pollen collecting baskets and store pollen in their crop, an internal part of their bodies. Then there are the exceptions to the rule, the cuckoo bees that collect no pollen at all. They have no pollen collecting hairs because they lay their eggs in the nests of other bees. They have no need to provision a nest. When the egg hatches, it kills the host's offspring and feeds on the stored pollen. Male bees don't collect pollen, so they have no pollen collecting hairs, although it does cling to the other hairs on their bodies. There is research that's shown that pollen has a negative charge and the hairs on a bee have a positive charge, which attracts the pollen to the bee when it visits a flower. So the male bee does some accidental pollination while getting a drink of nectar. Studies have shown that bees can sense the electric charge in a flower. A lower negative charge from the flower may indicate that the flower has already been visited by another pollinator, so the flower won't provide as much pollen or nectar. The bee may move on to a different blossom. Only female bees can sting, usually only if you do something to them, like stepping on them or putting your hand down on top of them. They don't need to be defensive because there's no large colony to protect. Native bees, unlike honeybees, don't have barbed stingers that can stay in the skin after stinging. They're able to sting repeatedly. However, they usually are more interested in gathering pollen and nectar, so rarely sting. Many native bees are small and can't sting a person. I often walk among my flowers without any problem while the bees are visiting to collect pollen and nectar. Our native bees are very gentle. Male bees aren't able to sting. Their sole purpose is to mate with the female bees. Most females mate only once in their lives. I like trivia, and I ran across Jacob Schmidt. Jacob Schmidt is an entomologist who has developed the Schmidt Pain Index while studying venom chemistry. It's a pain scale for insect stings, ranking stings from 0 to 4. Sweat bee stings rank a 1, which is the least painful. Honeybee stings rank a 2. His descriptions of the stings are very unusual. He describes a sweat bee sting as light and ephemeral, almost fruity. A tiny spark has singed a single hair on your arm. Just to reassure you, we have no 4s in Ohio. Now that you know a little bit about bees, we'll take a quick look at wasps. Wasps have no pollen-carrying structures because they don't carry pollen. They have a pinched waist and 2 pairs of wings, just as bees do. Wasps are not hairy, but do have sparse hairs that are unbranched. Wasps have spines on their legs. They share a thread waist and elbowed antennae with bees. Some wasps have a very similar vein pattern on their wings as bees. Vein patterns and placement of cells on wings are another means used for identification. Wasps are carnivores, as opposed to vegetarian bees, which feed on pollen and nectar. Wasps do visit flowers for nectar. Eastern yellowjackets are the insects you see that live in the ground in colonies of 1,000 to 3,000 workers or more. They are very defensive of their colony, but they are wasps, not bees. And there are always exceptions to these traits. Flies have only one pair of wings, which is hard to tell unless you're able to look closely. Flies have short, stout antennae. This may be the easiest way to tell at a glance. Some flies hold their wings out to the side when they're perched, like the fly in the photo, but not all flies do this. Flies are also more robust and broad between the thorax and the abdomen. Flies have large eyes that may meet at the top of their heads, and they're often forward facing. Flies are not hairy or have only sparse hairs. However, there are exceptions. The picture here at the bottom is of the Bumblebee robber fly, which is very hairy. Flies don't have any pollen-carrying structures because they don't collect pollen. Flies have a short tongue. They lap up their food. They feed on organic decaying material, but they do visit flowers for nectar. Again, there are always exceptions. Many of our fruits and vegetables are pollinated by bees, but there's more to it. For example, milkweed is a host plant for the monarch butterfly. We've heard about the decrease in the number of monarchs. People have been encouraged to plant milkweed for them. The butterfly lays its eggs on the milkweed plant. When the eggs hatch, the caterpillars feed on the leaves of the plant, drop off, and crawl away to another place to form a chrysalis, later emerging as butterflies. The milkweed plant is pollinated most effectively by large carpenter bees and bumblebees. Smaller bees get caught and are not able to escape. They get caught in the anther pouches, can't pull loose, and die there. Without the larger bees, there would be fewer milkweed plants for the monarchs. Everything is connected. Phenology is the study of recurring biological events, such as bloom time and insect emergence. Each year, the events follow the same sequence, no matter what. One of the first trees to bloom here in the spring is the silver maple, followed by red maple and star magnolia. Other plants follow in the same order each year. The development of both plants and insects is temperature dependent, not calendar dependent. Many of our native bees appear at just the same time as their favorite plants are coming into bloom. They have co-evolved with our native plants, making them uniquely qualified to pollinate them. Some bees are specialists and some are generalists. Specialist bees forage on a particular species or a few species of plants. Drury's longhorned bee is a specialist on plants in the goldenrod and aster family, so we don't see these bees until fall. They forage on the plant, build and provision their nests in the ground, lay their eggs, and die. Their nests remain tucked away until the next year when the temperature and conditions are right for the new adults to emerge and start the cycle again. Specialist bees do visit other plant species for nectar. Other bees are generalists and visit many species of plants, including the same plants preferred by specialist bees. They may be out and about from spring until fall, as are the bumblebees and carpenter bees. So it's important for there to be always something in bloom for the bees to forage on. A good rule of thumb is to have at least 3 different species of native plants blooming at a time, from spring through fall. Trees and shrubs also provide important food and nesting sites. Bees need a variety of plants and a variety of blossom shapes. They forage for food close to their nests, a practice called central place foraging. On each trip, bees will visit plants of 1 or only a few flowering species, even when other flowers are available. This behavior is called flower fidelity or flower constancy and allows bees to successfully transfer pollen to receptive flowers of the same species. There are some bees that have been known to fly miles from their nests if needed. Some tiny bees may travel no further than a few hundred yards. Bees collect pollen for protein and nectar for carbohydrates. Adult bees eat a little pollen and drink a lot of nectar. They feed their young a lot of pollen, sometimes mixed with a little nectar. Not all plants have both pollen and nectar, and not all pollen and nectar are equally nutritious. While bees may visit the flowers we plant, not all of them provide good nutrition. Just because it's a pretty flower doesn't mean it's the best choice for pollinators. This is especially true when we're talking about non-native or introduced plants. Some plants are being developed that have no pollen or nectar at all. Others have blooms that are so full that a pollinator can't even reach inside the flower. Native bees have co-evolved with native plants, and those plants provide food that best suits their needs. Some nurseries have cultivars of native plants available. Those may or may not provide pollen or nectar that has the best nutrition for bees. Most, 70% of our native bees live in the ground and are solitary. Some nest in lawns, others in bare patches. Some like sandy soil, others will nest in soil with more clay. They may nest in garden paths or even in unpaved driveways. Other bees are twig or cavity nesters. They may nest in holes in dead logs, abandoned mouse nests, dried plant stems, rock walls, or even the tubing in an outdoor chair. My husband saw a tiny bee carrying nesting material into a nail hole while he was standing in line outside the UPS office. Many of our native bees are solitary bees, with one female bee constructing, provisioning, and laying eggs for one nest. Each nest may contain several cells. She will provision a cell with food, lay an egg, seal the cell, then begin work to make a new cell. At the end of the season for that particular bee, she will die, leaving the nest and its contents to overwinter on its own, although there are always exceptions. Some bees may nest near each other in groups called aggregations, but they still are solitary. A few may share an entrance hole. There's a type of mining bee that appears in spring. You may first notice them when you see little volcanoes in a flower bed, maybe hundreds of them. This bee lines each cell in its nest with a cellophane-like substance that keeps the underground cells dry. They are out only in the spring and aren't out for long. But if you're bothered by them, you can try watering the area where they nest to encourage them to move. But better yet, just be patient and they'll be back underground for the rest of the summer before you know it. Other mining bees in this family will be out during other parts of the summer. Now, our bumblebees are not solitary bees. They live in small colonies with a queen and many workers. Now we'll take a closer look at a few of our native bees. The Spring Beauty mining bee is a specialist bee on the Spring Beauty wildflower. The Spring Beauty is an ephemeral plant. You can see this plant in the spring, but then it dies back and doesn't appear again until the next spring. The bee will dig into the soil under a thin layer of leaves to make galleries for her nest. The nest will be provisioned, eggs laid, and everything sealed up around the time the spring beauty plant is finished blooming. The eggs will develop into adults and overwinter underground. The bee won't appear again until the following spring when the plant is ready to bloom again. The pollen of the spring beauty is pink, so that is what you're seeing on the hind leg of the bee. The yellow-faced bee, also called a masked bee, has very little hair and no pollen collecting hairs at all. Many times they're mistaken for wasps. It carries pollen internally. When it gets back to the nest, it regurgitates the pollen. It's mostly black with white or yellow on its face and legs. The coloring in the face extends up beside the eyes. This one is a male, so there's more yellow on the face. A female would have less. They nest in hollow stems of dead plants, beetle burrows, earthworm holes, holes in wasp nests, or even nail holes. They use their tongues to line their nests with a cellophane-like substance to waterproof the nest and keep it free from contamination. They're thought to be generalists, visiting many different plants, but it's hard to tell because their pollen is carried internally. Leafcutter bees are solitary generalists that can nest in hollow plant stems. There are about 30 species in Ohio. She'll cut circular pieces out of leaves or flower petals and use those to create a cell for her egg inside the hollow part of a stem. The cell looks like a rolled up parcel of leaves. Inside will be pollen, nectar, and an egg. Each cell can take from 1.5 to 3 hours to create. She'll make several cells in each stem. Pollen is carried on the underside of her abdomen. Often this bee will curl the end of its abdomen up, exposing the hairs underneath. My husband was back at the UPS office yesterday and took some pictures for me with his phone. The bee that he saw at the UPS office is a leafcutter bee. She's carrying a leaf in the top picture, and you can see the pollen collecting hairs on the underside of her abdomen. This isn't a stem that she's nesting in, but she must like it for a nest. The squash bee will appear about the time squash plants are in bloom. They only collect pollen from plants in the squash family, like zucchini, pumpkins, summer squash, and winter squash. They nest in the ground, often near their host plants. They fly early in the morning when squash blossoms first open and are back in their nests by mid-morning. If you've ever picked a closed squash blossom to use in a frittata or to stuff for lunch, you might have been surprised to find a bee or two or even 3 sleeping inside. These are the male squash bees hanging out, waiting for the females. Be sure to shake the blossoms before you bring them into the house. There are small green sweat bees that forage on a variety of plants and nest in rotting logs. They may produce 3 generations a year. There are other bees in the same family, but a different genus, that are also called sweat bees, the Lasioglossum, which is the largest bee genus in the world. Both have a liking for the sweat on our skin. If they discover a sweaty one of us, they emit a pheromone, letting others know what they found. You may end up with a few more coming for a lick. If you swat one, a dying bee releases one last blast of pheromones, letting even more bees know about your location. Unless they're pinched or caught in the folds of clothing or skin, they're interested only in the sweat, not stinging. There are about 16 species of bumblebees in Ohio, about 10 of them usually seen. Pay attention to the pattern of yellow on their thorax and abdomen, and you'll see that some have more yellow than others, or even some brown. There's a once common bumblebee, the rusty-patched bumblebee, that is now on the endangered species list. Others, but not all, are in decline. Bumblebees are not solitary bees. They are eusocial bees living in small colonies, not large ones like the social honeybee. Each spring, a young queen emerges from the place where she overwintered and starts a new colony. In an abandoned mouse nest maybe, under leaf litter, or other location she finds suitable, maybe even an overturned flower pot. She'll lay eggs and do the foraging until the first eggs hatch. The new workers, all girls, will take care of the new eggs and do the foraging. The queen will continue to stay in the colony laying eggs for the rest of the season. As the end of the season nears, she'll lay eggs that will become drones, males. The drones will mate with some of the queens that emerge afterwards, some of the females that emerge afterwards. The mated females will overwinter as new queens and will be the queens that start the new colonies the next season. These colonies are usually fewer than 200 bees, unlike honeybee colonies that'll contain thousands of bees. The new queens appear early in the spring, visiting early flowers, maples, and willows. Bumblebees are very effective pollinators. Some of them have long tongues, making it possible for them to reach deep into tube-shaped flowers. For plants like tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, and potatoes, the pollen is stored in the anthers of the flower, making it hard to reach. Bumblebees do something called buzz pollination, which releases the pollen. They hang below the flower and vibrate their flight muscles, which releases the pollen. When the anthers are shaken, the pollen is released, like salt from a salt shaker. Not all bees are able to do this. The wind may also shake the pollen loose, but pollination is much better with bumblebees. If you listen carefully, you can hear them buzzing the flower. Bumblebees work more quickly than honeybees, are able to carry much more pollen, are able to stay active in colder weather, and much earlier and later in the day. This makes them very efficient pollinators. If you see what looks like a bumblebee, but has a shiny black abdomen, you've spotted a large carpenter bee. Watch out for nest holes in your wood structures. They chew tunnels in wood to create their nests. The males patrol the area outside the nests. They may fly up to you, right up to your face, trying to scare you away, but they can't harm you. Remember, males can't sting. Woodpeckers often cause further damage to wood structures where carpenter bees have formed a nest. They tear open the wood to get to the nests inside. Carpenter bees often steal nectar by chewing holes through the sides of flowers. Their eggs are 1/2 inch long. In a lifetime, they lay up to 8 eggs. There are also small carpenter bees. These are tiny black bees from 1/10 of an inch to 1/2 inch long, with few hairs. They have a white stripe on their faces. They nest in old wood and inside stems of dead, burnt, or broken twigs. The stem or twig must be broken at the tip because they can't chew through the stem or the twig itself. They are able to chew through the pith in the stem and use it to provide divisions between the cells. They like to nest in roses, raspberries, and sumac. They're generalists when it comes to foraging. The female will watch over her nest until all of the eggs she has laid have developed into adults. Native bees need our help. They need places to nest and plants for pollen and nectar. We can help by planting native plants for them and by making our yards bee-friendly. We can leave bare patches and places for our ground nesting bees, although some ground nesters will nest in grass. We can leave dead trees for the bees that nest under bark or in tunnels made by beetles. We can leave leaf litter for the queen bumblebees to use to nest under. We can plant flowers in patches that are connected to each other and provide a safe way for the bees to move from plant to plant. We can plant a variety of flower types and colors so something is blooming from spring until fall. Bees prefer flowers in shades of purple, yellow, and white. They don't see the color red very well. It appears as green. They are able to see ultraviolet colors in the flowers, colors we can't see. Try to have 3 species of native flowers blooming at any time. In the fall, leave flower heads on plants and wait until spring to remove them. In the early spring, we can cut them back to 8 to 24 inches high. The plant will grow up to cover the stems. This will give the stem nesting bees a place to nest. Then in fall, leave the blossoms again to be cut back in the spring. The old stem stalks will gradually decompose. The bees will nest in the newly cut stems. If you need to clean up before you think the bees have come out, you can put cut stems aside in an out-of-the-way place so any bees that have nested there can emerge safely. Other hollow-stemmed plants that can be used for nesting are sunflowers, asters, goldenrod, bee balm, ironweed, and alliums. Sometimes I cut back some flower heads as blooms fade, so there aren't too many seeds spread. I just leave part of the stem. It depends on the plant. We can eliminate or limit pesticide use. Be sure to read the labels. If you do use a pesticide, it should be only after you've tried other methods of control. Do not use it when the flowers on the plant are in bloom. At other times, limit application to times of day when bees are less likely to be flying. However, even when pesticides are applied according to label directions, that doesn't mean native bees are safe. There was a city that legally sprayed trees for aphids and unfortunately killed 50,000 bumblebees. If you're interested in creating your own nesting blocks or houses, there are many guides online. Be sure to use care to keep your hotels clean to prevent disease. This is a controversial practice due to the danger of spreading disease by close living quarters. Most bees are solitary and do not live so close together. One of the handouts has suggestions for making houses and blocks if you choose to do so. But if you do, please be sure to maintain the hotels. I've talked about only a few of our 500 or so native bees, so there's much more to learn. There's a website called iNaturalist where you can post photos of bees, insects, plants, and other natural world observations to share with others. Photos of anything living or once living can be added. You can also get help identifying what you photographed. Any bee photos you post automatically are included in the Ohio Bee Atlas, where sightings of Ohio bees are recorded. You can access it through iNaturalist. Many of the bees in the photos I've used here were identified on iNaturalist. If you're looking for a good resource book or two, The Bees in Your Backyard by Joseph Wilson and Olivia Carroll is a great one. There are lots of details about the bees of North America. Another book is Bees, an Identification and Native Plant Forage Guide by Heather Holm. This book is about the bees we have in the Midwest, Great Lakes, and Northeast regions, and the plants they visit. It's a who goes to what kind of book. If you'd like to learn more about our native bees, we'll post links to some resources to get you started. There are a couple of websites you might find interesting. The Ohio State University has a bee lab site. There's information about nesting blocks here, plus links to a tremendous number of other resources. Another great site is the Xerces Society. Their site has a wealth of information on bees and other pollinators, along with native plant suggestions for our region. Links to these three sites will be posted for you. We'll also have links to some fact sheets about our bees. Thanks for listening and learning about our native bees.
Awesome. Fantastic, Rosemary. I definitely learned a lot.
So did I.
That's great. That's half the fun of doing a presentation is all the research you get to do. So I'm going to open up the floor for questions. If there's any questions on anything or would like to ask Rosemary something or try to stop any of us on the panel, please do so. At the bottom, there's a chat box and there's also a question and answers box. It says Q&A down at the bottom. It looks like we have one. And the question is, what was the white flower on your How We Can Help slide? So you want to go back to that slide?
How do I go back? Oh, now the arrow keys are working. The white flower. Carol? Oh, you're muted.
You're muted. Hold on. All right, go now. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I'm still drawing a blank. Yeah. I can get back with somebody when I remember, when it surfaces.
It's not goat's beard, is it?
No. Reese knows. There you go. Thanks, Reese.
Culver's foot. Or Culver's root.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Excellent. So, yeah, Culver's root is correct. Someone said they're overwhelmed. Thank you. I'll have to review the information more than once from Linda. That's great. We will be on the lookout. We'll have a link here soon with recordings for all of our programs. And someone asked, compared to last year, are our pollinators increasing or decreasing in numbers?
I think it's too soon to tell. Our spring has been really different this year. We went right from really cool weather to pretty hot weather. So it's a little hard to judge right now.
Does anyone know historically how, native bees and stuff, have their numbers been declining?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yep.
Across the world, they are all pollinators. That's the whole reason that we're trying to teach people about pollinators, about native plants and their importance.
Exactly.
There's a book out called Nature's New Hope by Doug Ptolemy that talks about the importance of planting native plants and the effect of pollinators on just the whole, how everything is connected and what we can do to in our own backyards to help improve the number of native plants and consequently our native pollinators.
And everyone remember, hopefully after this, or I'm pretty sure after this, once we end the meeting, you will be directed to a website. It'll have all the links from last week's presentation, and then right under that, it'll have all the links that Rosemary referenced, iNaturalist, some fact sheets from Ohio State. Go ahead and check them out, especially the people that said they were looking for more information and overwhelmed. Definitely check that out. We have a few more people saying bravo, amazing, very informative.
Thank you.
Couple people. And then we have another question. Are honeybee swarms being caught in Ashtabula County more or less than last spring? I've heard more.
I've heard there have been quite a few. I don't know if William is on, but William could probably answer that. I know he's been out a lot.
That's who I heard more from. So that's my only source, is that he has been getting more recently.
And honeybees are a whole.
William said many more this
Okay.
because of the mild winter.
Okay, good.
Someone else said there's been a lot of swarms this year. Thank you, Laura. Lynn said, FYI, I've developed a bond with honeybees. I don't treat my property, so I have a lot of clover.
Good.
Visit frequently.
Good.
I have to direct my mower around them.
Good. She needs an eye, or whoever needs an eye slow for bees.
Yeah, a couple more people said the swarm. They've seen a lot more swarms. Or people are home a lot more, so they're seeing more swarms that would be when they were at work. That makes sense too. Yeah, William was telling me earlier, or last week, that the mild winter meant the honeybee population did pretty well around here because it didn't get too cold and freeze a lot of them out. So that's all right, everybody. We'll wait for a few more minutes for a few more questions. There's one that came in. It says, is the golden mean horizontal hive more bee friendly than the standard vertical hive? Or is it all height?
For someone else than me to answer. Our hives are standard Langstroth hives. We use mediums. We don't use deeps. I don't know about the other. Sorry.
You think William would have an opinion on that?
Maybe.
Well, I can let him talk. Well, William, you can unmute yourself if you want to add in anything on that.
What was the question regarding between a difference? Which one's better?
Yeah, or bee friendly is, I guess, the question. Which one's more bee friendly?
When are the horizontal ones?
The horizontal hives are harder to overwinter.
Harder to,
Okay, so there's a better chance of them surviving in the vertical hives.
Yeah, honeybees, because that's what we're talking about, honeybees. Honeybees like to work up. So they like the, up and down hive rather than a vertical hive.
and it's harder.
Rather than a horizontal.
Horizontal, right.
Okay. Thank you,
You'll
William.
get more, you'll get more honey out of a Langstroth hive. Just because they like to work up.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then Linda said, this is wonderful, educational, enjoyable. Thank you so much. So,
Thank you, Linda.
thank you, Linda. All right. Well, it's getting close to 8 o'clock. If anyone has any questions, anything else for the good of the order, please put them in. I think there was some good discussion afterwards. And like I said, I definitely learned a lot. We're going to be sending a survey too to your email. So if you have time, fill out that survey. Let us know how Rosemary did. Let us know what we can improve upon. Let us know how the Zoom went and different topics that you would like to hear from in the future. A few more people saying thank you. Laura asks, I have water out for my hives, but I have to refill them all every day. What do you do for your putting out water for your hives?
I have a pond, so we don't put out water. We don't need to.
I use a bird bath to provide water to the honeybees.
I think there are a lot of different things people do. I heard of someone using a chicken feeder, but had a problem that people stole it. I think they lived in a more of a city lot area. But there are a lot of things you can use for water. You just have to make sure that it's always there if you don't have another water source nearby.
Someone else asked if basswood are native trees, and I believe so. They're native to North America.
Those are a great bee tree. There's one of the presentations coming up is with Bill Hendricks. He'll be talking about trees and bees. That will be
July 22nd.
There we go. I'm putting that on my calendar.
That'll be a good one too.
Yes.
Good. We've had two really great informational sessions already. So I encourage everybody, if you enjoyed the first two or this one, come back next week. Next week we have Be Smart with Pesticides. So Rosemary touched on it a little bit about the pesticides and the pollinators. But we're going to hear from Suzanne Westlake from Ashtabula County Soil and Water Conservation District. So it's going to be another great program next Wednesday, same time, same place, same Zoom channel. Last call for questions. Last call for questions. Someone asked if these are recorded and how do I get them? They will be recorded. I will be putting them up on that same website that you will get after you get off of this. I will put them up, and then if you still can't find them, go ahead and shoot me an email, Andrew Holden. My email is holden.155@osu.edu. Again, that's holden.155@osu.edu. And Suzanne said no pressure. It will be no pressure at all. It'll be great. Another person said thank you from the Geauga County Master Gardeners. Linda,
Oh, wow.
great to see some other Master Gardener groups on. And that's about it. If there's any other thing or anything else that you want to talk about, put in the chat. If not, we are good to go. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you, Rosemary. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, NC. Thank you, William, for answering some more bee questions. And we will see you all next week. Thank you, everybody.